Thank you everybody for coming. It's a tremendous chizuk to see the crowd that's coming that actually cares about the Yom of Kashrus. Not going to take up too much time, but wanted to thank some of our sponsors, Skyline Restaurant, need not say more, and Cedar Media, Zevi Kaufman, for all your live sound, music production, podcast production, and marketing. You could speak to Zevi Kaufman, proud sponsor of tonight, and have our video being recorded by Mentor Media. Thank you very much for contributing. I'd like to thank Mishkan Yechiel Shul, Ma'alot Dafna, Kagan for hosting us, hosting this event. And we're going to start with some divrei brocha, Hagaon from the Rav, shlita.
I want to thank the organizers and the sponsors for organizing this very Kosher, timely canvas to discuss Kashrus problems, especially ben hazmanim, when people leave their houses and not the best, or the Kashrus is always available. The distinguished speakers are going to speak about Kashrus problems. Just in 1 minute, I want to mention that besides Kashrus problems, when people book accommodations not talking about chutzlars, I'm talking about even here in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael might be a bigger problem. There's 3 or 4 other issues which have to be dealt with. I'll just mention the issues, and I'm sure everyone will deal with it in a proper way. The first thing is water meters. Now, there's 2 types of water meters which are being used in Eretz Yisrael. One of them is not a halachic problem, but there's another water meter which causes an electric spark. It works with electricity. The water produces electricity, and the electricity causes the meter to record whatever it has to record. So the water meter, which is in all from places, the water company was very cooperative that the meters in Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak and any from place, the water meters that don't have any shilas. However, there's places which are not from places, or even maybe they're not created places, and they have water meters which all the G'dolei HaPoskim, I'm not telling the Chumrah, I'm telling all the G'dolei HaPoskim, Rav Yoshev, Mr. Karelitz, Rav Wosner, they're all asked these water meters. A person should check before he goes anywhere where there's a proper water meter or not. This is a Shabbos problem. Another Shabbos problem is that people go in all kinds of places that the Erev is very questionable. Every Erev has to have a Rav Talmud Chacham who's responsible for the Erev, and he checks the Erev. Someone checks the Erev every single Friday before Shabbos, and this is a very important because it might not be an Issa D'Oraisa because these Kforim don't have Shishim Ribui, but definitely an Issa D'Rabbanan. They don't want to spoil their vacation by finding out that there's no Erev and you won't be able to carry outside. The third issue, which is not a Kashrus issue, it's nogeya to food. When you go to some place for Shabbos, it's besides which I assume that the speakers are going to discuss, the halachic ramifications of the quality and the contents of the food, but something which is very important is Motzei Shabbos. It's Motzei Shabbos that there's a lot of shilas of chazara, of bishul, bishul. I'm not going to go into that. So they have to have a mashgiach in the place who's not stam a mashgiach, a person who's a talmud chacham who knows Hilchos Shabbos, and there shouldn't be any shoshes of chazara, of bishul, etc., etc. So this is very important, that you have to make sure that the Shabbos kitchen not only the food, but the Hilchah Shabbos aspect is also being taken care of. A third and a fourth issue, the fifth issue, which is related, is that some people rent these cottages. Simmerim was called in Eretz Yisrael, and they're nice accommodations. They have all the facilities, air conditioning, and they have jacuzzis also. So sometimes the jacuzzi is in the house itself. It's not a jacuzzi. I was in the past. Many people called me up with questions. If to know there's a jacuzzi in the house and it gives off some steam or it's hot, etc., it might be a shiloh. They might make a brocha in the whole room. In my Sefer Avnei Parsel Chelik Aleph, there's a whole simmer which discusses making brochas in places where there's jacuzzis. And the last issue, which I don't want to take any more time, I think made the most important issue, is the Indian of tznius. A person has to make sure when he goes away that the place where he's going to, that there's proper standards of tznius, especially of children. They shouldn't be exposed to all kinds of scenes which we don't want. Okay, so again, we want to thank the organizers that are giving this chus to Ma'alot Dafna, that we'll be able to host this kenes. It's really a chus for us, and it should come out of Toelis that we should not only enjoy our vacation, but we should enjoy our vacation, Baruch also. Good luck and thank you.
Good luck, everyone. Rishus, the Rav, Shlita. Ma'alot Dafna is an amazing place for us to have this kenes. I lived here in Ma'alot Dafna for many years, and Ma'alot Dafna has tremendous representation from a lot of the Kashrus influencers today. Rabbi Shalom Fishbein lived here. He runs the CRC, and he was assistant rabbi. He was assistant rabbi here. Rabbi Tzvi Holland, who is very involved in the K, lived here. Rabbi Ishmael Wiener lived here in Rehov Machal, and I lived here for 10 years representing the Chof-K, I guess. The OU has not yet been represented, but we're waiting for Rabbi Krakowski to come, and he'll be that representation. But the major kashrus organizations in the world, K, well, the OU is the largest, K, Chof-K, and OK, all four of them work very much together. And that's something that's important to know, because there is a lot of cooperation in America amongst the different kashrus organizations. And therefore, especially when you hear something from one voice from all four of them, so it can erase a lot of the questions people have, because there's a bunch of questions, thank you, people have as far as kashrus. Some people think things are politics or whatever it might be. There's a lot to talk about tonight. I have to make two disclaimers before we start. First disclaimer is I do not represent the Chof-K. My father, Zechatar brocha, he founded the Chof-K. My two brothers run the Chof-K today. I do not represent the Chof-K. I do not work for the Chof-K at the moment. I would say at the most I was my father's personal assistant, particularly here in Eretz Yisrael. I would go with my father to I went to the plants that he had here, and also to all the rabbanim that he would visit together with my father, and did a teeny bit of work in America. But I do not represent the Chof-K. And whatever I say tonight should not be attributed to them, and they do not take responsibility for what I say. And I can't, and you shouldn't think that what I'm saying is Chof-K policy. But I spent a lot of time at my father's table, with my father's house, and with my father, and I've been exposed to a very large amount. I've also spoken to the Rav Nachum about a lot of things, and also to Rabbi Wiener, which we've done a lot of things together also. My other second disclaimer is I'm not an expert. I don't know what they put on the signs. I think the sign said something about I'm not sure what the word was, but I'm not an expert in kashrus. I've been around a lot. I've seen a lot. But when we deal with, especially with the halachas, that I'm going to leave it to Rabbi Krakowski to deal with the halachic nuances, which is not really my forte. So those are the two disclaimers I'd like to make beforehand. I'd like to discuss a little bit to understand kashrus. This is very important, what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to just start with a story. One time I went into a store to buy a case for a mezuzah. And a woman showed me a case and said, "It's beautiful, but I want something a little bit bigger." She says, why do you want bigger? I said, because bigger is more mahudar. She said, I don't get it. Is it kosher or it's not kosher? She's like, Rabbi, is it kosher? If it's kosher, so then what's your problem? She said, I don't understand all of these things. Like, what's the deal? Like, what's this? What does it mean, mahadran? If it's kosher, it's kosher. Like, what's... And she kept on repeating it over again, and I wasn't going to, try to explain to her what exactly it is, but this is a very important thing to understand. That when we deal with kashrus, it's not a question of black and white. Is it kosher or is it treif? That's not what it's about. There are many different discussions. There are many different opinions. There's so much that goes into deciding whether or not something is acceptable or not acceptable, or reliable or not reliable. There are two different components to giving a hechsher. And this is, like I said, very important. One is your standard of kashrus. Because within the world of halacha, so there's some things that we would be soymech on and things that we wouldn't be soymech on. There's shitas that one can find, which is das yachid. And there are certain hechsherim that rely on tremendous kulas. Tremendous kulas. There are hechsherim, and I don't want to get into the discussion with everything, that they were set up originally for that purpose. We want to make the lowest possible standard of kashrus. Not necessarily because they're bad people, or because they want to make a lot of money, which you can in kashrus. That's not the reason necessarily. But because, look, it's in their opinion, this is just, I'm telling you what their approach is, better than treif, right? I want to try to get kashrus to the masses, get kashrus to as many people as I can, so I'll rely on the kulas, which I will tell you, none of the classic poskim would rely on. None of the classic hechsherim, the OU, the Chof-K, star K, OK, none of them would rely on this. The poskim would tell you that this is a das yachid, and it's not something which we would accept. But their opinion is, let's get kashrus to the masses. So their standard is very low. There are such things. Now, can a person say it's treif? It's hard to say it's treif. I would say it's not reliable. That's one thing. The other thing, which is totally different, is a question of a person's, I'll use the word execution. What I mean by that is, how good are they at being able to execute their standards? You could have someone who has super high standards, and there's a lot of this also, super high standards, but they don't know how to do it. Kashrus is a profession. You need to be a professional. There are people that my father used to discuss halacha with, but he wouldn't eat their hechsher because he knew they didn't know how to execute. They didn't know how to do it. So they might have been great talmidei chachamim, but you have to know how to run an organization. It's a business and it's a profession and it's a skill. Doing kashrus properly is a skill. So it's important for the Rav, good vach, Rabbi Krakowski, thank you very much for coming, for being here. It's a skill to be able to give a hechsher. These are the two different things. Now, I know the Rabbi Rosenberg, who used to run the OU years and years ago. Rabbi Rosenberg, so when he had fresh Baalei Tshuva, when I say fresh, I mean they were just becoming Baal Tshuva. So he told me, don't get them confused with kashrus. This one's good, that one's not good. You're going to start telling them, this Rav is okay. That's what you're going to confuse like the world. Like it's too much for them. If there's a Rav, and he says it's kosher, let them eat. Let them eat. It's not your problem, it's the Rav's problem. Now, I want to try to explain what I think he meant. He meant, I'm not going to say it's treif. I'm not going to let them eat treif. But if there's a Rav who's saying that it's kosher, and for this person where he's holding in his life, because he just became from, so that's where he's holding, so let him eat. Would Rabbi Rosenberg rely on it? For sure not. Would I rely on it? Absolutely not. But, for someone who says, tell me, is it kosher or is it not kosher? So I can't say it's not kosher. But for us, B'nai Torah, there's a standard which we've been living with our entire life. And there's a delicate balance of what to do when you come to Eretz Yisrael. Because here in Eretz Yisrael, the standard is a little higher. Rabbi Krakowski, would you say that that's true in general?
Achmara, so a little bit higher.
Achmara, so okay, so as we mentioned, there's two different things. There's the standard of the chumrah is a little higher. Pikuach is, in certain ways is not for sure. That's true. But in certain things, the standard is higher. In certain things, and that's something which we have to figure out. When I came to Eretz Yisrael, so Ma'alot Dafna was considered the American Kehila, but the Rav was always bringing us to live like we're living in Eretz Yisrael. So in a certain way, there are certain standards that are higher, certain standards. And a person has to know exactly, where am I in this picture? Do I want to stay, an American in certain standards, or am I looking to go up? But there's no question that we should not go lower than what we had in America. And one of the things, for example, that Rabbi Elephant told me is the Elephant runs Kashrus in America, is that there are many hotels in Eretz Yisrael will not bring the OU because our standards are too high. The standards are too high. So if people will tell you something like every kashrus here is like a higher standard in America, it's totally not true. It's absolutely not true. And for someone to come from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael to compromise their standards, that would be such a terrible thing. That would be a horrible. So we just have to know what I'm going to encourage tonight. I'm going to champion is being a person being a informed consumer. Know what's going on, know what questions to ask, know what to talk about, and a person can be knowledge is power. And the more you know, the more you realize there are certain things that's not acceptable, and we can find these things out. It's not impossible. A person sometimes, Chav Chaim said, people don't know. They think that Lashon Hara is impossible that a person not to speak Lashon Hara. A person doesn't know. It's like, okay, it's too hard. It's not too hard. It's very doable. Just a person has to know how to do it. So Baruch Hashem, is Rabbi Krakowski here with us. I'd like to offer him to come up and to speak. Rabbi Krakowski, the floor is yours.
Rosh, the Ma'alot Dafna, Rosh, Motzei Senter, Rosh the ma'arganim, the Iske, the Kashrus. It's a cover goal to be able to address such a tzibur. So I actually didn't understand the question right when Rabbi Senter asked the question, and now I understand it, and for sure. The standards that the tzibur of B'nai Torah and Eretz Yisrael strive for is certainly, the highest standards in every area in halacha. The mere fact that people choose to be koveya, meishavam in Eretz Yisrael, in the confines of Daled Amos Shel Halacha, it speaks for itself, and of course, that's the standards are higher. And there was one time I had a shir discussing various aspects. It was more of a lumdish shir, but it was in the inyonim of Machol Yaakov. And so, one of these types of, nitty-gritty shilas that came up, and somebody said, somebody asked the shilah, after a Rav said something that was halacha l'maisa, and they said, well, would that be for a ben Torah? I said, well, ben Torah by definition means somebody who keeps the Torah, so I don't know of two sets of standards. So there are areas in halacha that say, Baal Nefesh, Yachmir. But those aren't very many halachas where the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch, or the Ramah would end off with such a sprach of the Baal Nefesh Yachmir. So this Rav mentioned it. Somebody said, well, what does a Baal Nefesh mean? And he said very simply that he thinks the definition of a Baal Nefesh is somebody who cares more about their Nefesh than they do about their Guf. So, at the time it was a cute line, got a few chuckles, and whatever it was, but the emes is, it's very, very, very apropos, especially for tonight's subject of ben hazmanim, and when I was told by the ma'arganim about people who are traveling, both in Eretz Yisrael and perhaps in the diaspora, in Chutz La'aretz, there's a very choshev Harav in America, from a different kashrus agency, one of the Gedolei Paiskim in America now, Moshe Heinemann, who he often quotes that when a person's traveling, they have a gather of b'diavad, that they're able to be saimach on b'diavad. And there's a par mar mekaymus for us. The Motzei Ephraim says it already. It's something which is gebrengt in a few different places. So now the shaila arises though if you take that Motzei Ephraim or you take such a psak and you want to know, well, when you're traveling, does that mean every time and every circumstance where a person is traveling, that then it's already okay that they're in a post facto type of situation or not? And it would seem a davar pashut that once somebody's in a situation, yes, it's post facto. The shaila is when a person plans a trip. I heard from a Rav once here in Eretz Yisrael. They said before somebody buys a house, they should look about all the shilas, about mezuzahs and whatever. They should think about this. They should think about where to build a sukkah. So, I don't know if a person has to be koivei of their house, where or not they might have shilas about mezuzah or not. It's fine, you can buy a house that has shilas, and maximum be a little bit more machmir and put up an extra mezuzah. Right? As long as it's not two mezuzahs in the same doorway. Right? We read a Shabbos Mincha, Elyashiv. But calls them on that it's not in the same place. Okay, so you have a shiloh, you put up an extra mezuzah. But there's a certain thing to be said for somebody thinking in advance about a situation they're going to be in. Parnasa, right, we're coming up to the 9 days of Tisha B'Av, where there are halachas about working on Tisha B'Av, shilas about working on Tisha B'Av, of shilas and cholamayim, and halacha it's gebrengt that parnasa, somebody who's being nisparnes, there's a gevissa din of a mitzvah. A person has to be mefarnes their family. But if a person's traveling for a vacation, so it's true when they end up somewhere and they're hungry and they don't have a lot to eat, they might be able to rely on certain leniencies. But is that the situation you want to put yourself into? That is the shayla of a Baal Nefesh. Baal Nefesh, somebody who is Nefesh, is more chashiv to him than his guf. So you're going to have a little bit of a geshmak of time and be tulei zehu kiyumai. You're traveling, it's said in the name, maybe the Rav will say otherwise, but it's said in the name of Elyashiv. Used to be a shayla going on the way the roads used to go before the Bikah was exactly how it's built now, that you went Me'ever Liyarden to go to Tveria for a few kilometers. So the shayla was asked to Elyashiv, at least that's how it's said. Again, maybe the Rav will say differently from Elyashiv. But that Elyashiv said that Mistama, somebody who's traveling to the north, to Tveria, and Bein Hazmanim, it's b'chtei, they should come back and learn better. So it's all a chefza of learning. I think there was another tziruf that it's because b'chtei to go to another chelik in Eretz Yisrael, that's the way to go. That's also. So of course, there's something to be said for vacations and shalom bayis and the kids and giving everybody geshmak of time. When you're trying to organize, trying to plan, having that geshmak of time. If your nefesh is choshev, l'chayro, you're going to think out all the aspects of kashrus beforehand. Kashrus, what was he starting the kashrus for B'nai Torah and Eretz Yisrael? Of course, it's on a very high level. But when we leave the confines of our neighborhoods, the areas where we have the luxury of being able to have everything we want with the best and sheinste hashgachos, and we go out to the wild east, I guess, over here, or maybe those that are traveling to the wild west. And it's not the same thing. So you have to think twice. You have to think twice when you're planning, and you have to think twice again when you end up in that situation. And the bar is like this. And it's not pshat that anybody b'chavana brought that, made michsholos in Eretz Yisrael, that it should be hard for people to keep kashrus. And nobody b'chavana made michsholos in Europe, that it should be hard for people to keep kashrus. But what happens? Well, in Europe, they don't have the luxury that the tzibur has in America. Rabbi Genak, the CEO of Kosher, always says in America we give kashrus for the goyim. The goyim beg us to give kashrus to their companies. We don't need all the products that we certify. You go into the supermarket in America, and 70% of the products are certified by the major American hashgachas, by the OU, the Chof-K, the Star-K, the OK, etc. 70 or 70+% of the regular standard products in the supermarket is kosher certified. So, and the majority of that is actually OU certified. So we don't need to give all those products hashgacha, but they're begging us to have hashgacha. In Europe, they live in the shadow. In America, there's anti-Semitism, but it's a little bit more latent. In Europe, they live in the shadow of a more blatant anti-Semitism. And the kihilos in Europe are far smaller than the kihilos in America. I tell people just to think about it for me, take one of the bigger out-of-town communities in America, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Chicago, Miami. Miami's not so small anymore. Right? You take one of these kilos and you compare it to like all three of the major European kilos, they're bigger. So the tzibur in America of eichlei kosher is much, much greater. So all those things combined, it's so much easier to have products that are certified the way they should be. In Europe, they don't have that luxury. And people sometimes, so there's a certain, more of a b'diavad type of status, and they sometimes settle for a lower standard. When it comes to Eretz Yisrael, the second everything, people maybe meaning well, but the second the Rabbanut requires everything to be kosher that comes into Eretz Yisrael, so it becomes a checklist, and you have to be able to misamen vi, as they say here. You have to be able to check off the boxes that what you're bringing in is kosher. So what every importer is going to be looking for, at the end of the day, he's interested in business. He needs to sell in the supermarkets. The food needs to be kosher to be able to sell in the supermarkets. He just needs something to pass by, some sort of paper that he can submit to say that to be yaitzazayin, that it's epis kosher. So there's so much that gets in here that's not up to that level. And it's the same thing when it comes to hotels and kitchens and restaurants and all these things. The second you don't want to advertise yourself as being not kosher, so you need to be kosher, you need to have Rabbanut certification. And Mamela, the standards become that much weaker because the tzibur that's looking for that, it's not us, and we shouldn't get confused for a moment that it is us. The tzibur that's looking for that are people who are, bekoshi, mesorati, and anything that says the word kosher on it, as they say in America, Paul Yiddish Elyashiv, or make it mekenda chesed. You can go in and eat. But that's not us. So it's not that anybody did something wrong here, and anybody's trying to trip us up here, and it's not fair. But you have to remember, when we say Nachem on Tisha B'Av, before we go out to our trips on hazmanim, we're still asking for something to be rebuilt. We're not there yet, and not everybody cares about kashrus the way we do. Not everybody cares about halacha the way we do. And Mamela, it's not, nobody's trying to trip us up, but we have to look, we have to think about those standards beforehand. And the shiloh should be asked beforehand. Plans should be made with a given amount of carefulness in advance to make sure to avoid those shilas. Am I supposed to talk about anything now, or just October? Okay.
Just want to say one thing if I could. Okay, Rabbi Carlebach, are we going to be taking questions as soon as they're ready? I just want to add a few short things. We have a second mic here. Zevi, if I can get a few more cups of water, that'd be great. Two things that I just want to mention that are very important. If you're traveling to Chutz La'aretz, I'm going to let you stay over here. I'll stand on the side. One is that products that have a hechsher in Chutz La'aretz, let's say in America, and it doesn't appear on the label in Chutz La'aretz, it's not because they just didn't, put the hechsher on, because because it's different packaging. It's because it doesn't have a hechsher. So you can have something that you see in let's say a type of potato chips, and this happens all the time because I do travel relatively often with Americans. Chutz La'aretz, and I go, oh wow, look at that! I know this is kosher in America, and I was like, that doesn't mean it's kosher here. It could be totally treif in Chutz La'aretz, totally. Just because it's kosher in America, it's a different plant and it's different ingredients. And the reason why we have a hechsher in Chutz La'aretz is because you need to have that. And over here, it doesn't have that hechsher. And just because it's the same company, it's made in a different plant, it does not mean that it's kosher. And I want to bring out one example which I'm going to ask Rabbi Krakowski about this, which is Coca-Cola is under the hechsher of the OU in America. But that does not mean that all of the Coca-Cola in the world is coming from the same factory. There's a factory that's under the OU hechsher, and from what I understand, I spoke to my brother about this, I never spoke to Rabbi Krakowski, but I believe that there's another factory that is not under the OU. Is that correct?
A little bit more complex.
Yeah, I know it's a little more complex. I'm trying to bring out is that it's not. Is it under the OU hechsher, the other factory?
No. If Coca-Cola without the OU or without Rav Landau's certification is not really under any hashgacha, and at the OU when we're asked, we recommend using Coca-Cola only with hashgacha. Just reminds me a little bit. I remember once at camp, Rabbi Belsky was asked a shayla on the Shas Tshuva session, and he said, "I'm going to teach the Olim how to answer a shayla they don't want to answer," and then he just went on to talk about something else.
I put Rabbi Krakowski on the spot there a little bit.
I'll share a very, very brief story and insight, which was that the rabbi in charge of Coca-Cola in the OU office is somebody very senior in the OU, who's in charge of ingredients, Rabbi Morrison, and one time there was a meeting in the OU offices between the OU administration and the administration of Coca-Cola, and they had some sort of question. They called Rabbi Morrison into the office to ask him the question. Rabbi Morrison said, "I'm not able to answer the question right now." This is what he means. So he says, "Well, I signed an agreement that I won't discuss anything about Coca-Cola, and these two people, they might be the CEO of the company, but I'm not authorized to discuss it with them, so I can't discuss it." So, we're very careful about discussing too much about the pratim. I know that recently there was this whole thing about the tartaric acid, which, again, most American hashgachos view as being what they refer to as a group 1, something that doesn't need certification. Rabbi Belsky has a long tshuva on it, which is certainly the pashtus of Taisus and Shas in a few places, and the Shagas Ari writes like that. Without getting into the complexities of the shayla, has to do with wine dried out 12 months. Here it's not, nowadays it's not dried out 12 months, it's dried through a process. Rabbi Belsky held the kitzer, that it's better, the drying process is better than the umdana of 12 months, because 12 months is only an umdana, and an umdana is an assumption. When we dry it out, we test it, and we know there's no moisture left. So he said, that's definitely better than being saimach on umdana. With that being said, not everybody agrees to that, particularly in Eretz Yisrael. Compared to any of the chutz la'aretz hashgachas, that was not an issue. Is it mutter to drink? It might be mutter to drink, but we recommend drinking drinks like Coca-Cola only with hashgacha. What I would say is that a very, very good example, though, is Pringles. Okay, Pringles, we know the plant in China is most likely treif. Okay, and even when it has Hebrew on the package, it doesn't say kosher, but there's Hebrew writing because they have the translation of a whole bunch of languages in the back. It doesn't mean that it is manufactured somewhere where they manufacture things generally for Israel and Melo it should be kosher. It's not. So there's certainly many examples of such products that aren't kosher just because it's kosher in America, and the OU.
Right. Well, it's not certified. The Coca-Cola is not certified by the OU.
It's not certified, and we recommend using Coca-Cola only with a reliable hashgacha.
And the other thing is, if you're close to Eretz Yisrael, there are times when they're exporting products from Eretz Yisrael to, I say products, I mean fruits and vegetables. Usually if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you think, okay, fruits and vegetables, I could at least be vegetarian for a couple of days. But it's not difficult just to clarify that it doesn't come from Eretz Yisrael. If it does, then you have all the issues, Trumas HaMaisus, Shemitah, whatever it might be. So if you're traveling close to Eretz Yisrael, it would be something that would be advised the person should make sure that he's not going to have that problem. Okay, we're opening the floor to questions, if anyone has any questions.
How reliable is a Shabbat list somewhere that you want to go to a show? How reliable is the list to make these products kosher who don't have this information?
You know what? I think if you would ask a Chabad shliach somewhere, they would probably tell you that it varies. Meaning, Not all.
Just say the question. Say the question.
So sorry. The question was relying on a list from a local Chabad somewhere. Not all Chabad shluchim are created equal. That's to answer number one. Number two is, b'chalal list, not just Chabad shluchim's list. You go into Europe, in most European cities, there's a list from very, very often a very chashuv Harav. Okay, now a list, you have to know what went into making their list. There are lists that are products that really don't need hashgacha. So like I mentioned before, something which is a group one. So, they're making it easier for you because, the regular traveler who's coming from a place like Yerushalayim or Brooklyn or Lakewood or whatever it is, right? They're not used to buying orange juice without hashgacha, right? They're not used to buying flour without hashgacha or sugar without hashgacha. So many of the items on the list are items which are, there's no questions about it. They're fine. They're totally fine. That's Aleph. Bezes, there are products that might be similar to the Shiloh about Pringles without an OU. They might have looked into products in their country that are coming from factories that have reliable hashgacha. And for whatever reason, traveling in Europe or in the parts of the Muslim world, they might not want hashgacha when they send it to these types of places. And therefore, the hashgacha might not appear on the package. But they discussed with they noticed it's the same plant as the ones that have an OU, OK, Chof-K, Star-K, whatever it is in America, or some Israeli hashgacha. They spoke to the hashgacha, they found out that it's fine. So they might be just compiling items like that. However, sometimes there might be products, and especially sometimes when you have on these lists unique products that you can't find in the larger firm communities as kosher. They have all sorts of candies and all sorts of things that are really exciting that you're like, wow, I got to bring this back for everybody, right? There, they might be relying on all sorts of umdanas and svaros that, again, the divrei might work, might not work l'chatchila, or might be subject to some sort of machlikas poskim. Just to give you an example, people have this concept. It's halacha, it's a gemara that stam kein leina b'nei yaimon. It's already a pasuk. We read it a few weeks ago. But stam kein leina b'nei yaimon, and therefore you don't have to be worried about kelim somewhere that they weren't used. So the Aruch HaShulchan, I think I read before, the Aruch HaShulchan also point out that in places where kelim are by definition used every day, like a restaurant, you can ask Rabbi Carlebach about that, but in restaurants, they don't usually have, in your house, you have kelim, everybody has a full set of milchiks and fleishiks, pots and pans and cutlery. They don't use everything every day. They didn't use the frying pan this morning because they didn't have an omelet. But in a restaurant, you have what you need, and on many days, you use everything. In a factory, that's certainly true, because the production lines, any day you're not using it is a loss of revenue. So you're using it all the time. But in certain places, they might rely on the fact this product is kosher. It could be they sometimes manufacture something not kosher on the same line, but all the ingredients here are fine. We checked into it once. We have no way of guaranteeing because we don't have hashgacha on it. But they're going to rely on that, and it becomes shvacher and shvacher with all the different seirufim of these types of heterim that they put into it. So then, obviously, that's really a sort of b'diavad, and one shouldn't rely on it. Additionally, some of them just aren't so thorough when they're checking.
Just want to tell you one thing, if I could, before we get to that. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert in kashrus. You missed that disclaimer beforehand. But I spoke to Rabbi Wiener before I got up here, and I spoke to my brother, Rabbi Zecharia Senter. And I asked my brother, both of them, what would you like me to convey? One of the things that Rabbi Zecharia Senter told me to say over is that there's a lot of people who are well-meaning, who are out of their league. And we're not going to talk about anyone in particular, any group of people, anything in particular. Kashrus is complicated. When I say it's complicated, it doesn't mean it's hard for you to keep. It means that to give a hechsher, you really need to know what you're doing. And that's what I started with beforehand. People can know the Shulchan Aruch and know that, but to execute, you really have to be a professional. I remember when the Chof-K first gave a hechsher to matzah, to Streit's matzah for the first time. My brother went all over the world to go to every matzah bakery, every factory, because he wanted to know what he's doing to do it right. And when you have people that are in a little town or whatever it is, and they're trying to do their best, and they could be very well-meaning people, but they're out of their league. They don't really know exactly what they're doing, and they're trying to help. So how do you figure it out? So what Rabbi Krakowski said is that not every person is created equal. There's people who know more about what they're doing. There are people who work for all the major organizations because there are factories all over the world, and they have a little bit more of a background in kashrus, and therefore they know what they're doing. But sometimes you have people who they're very well-meaning people, they're giving their life to Klal Yisrael, but in the realm of kashrus, they're not capable of helping you to decide. Now, again, does that mean it's treif? It doesn't mean that what you ate is treif. And sometimes you'll find out that I went somewhere and I thought something was good. It just means that it's not something that you want to rely on. And how do you figure that out? You have to find out from people that are in the world of kashrus, and they know who it is that is knowledgeable, that you can rely on.
Is there, in America, for example, if you want to ask a question about kashrus, call the OU and they can tell you about all over the country, Star-K, whatever. Is there a place you can call here in Israel? Like, for example, if you're going to Tzfat, and you hear all sorts of things about the kashrus in Tzfat, wherever it is that you're going, outside of Yerushalayim or outside of the Broch. I'd like to know if there's some email, some number to call and say, I'm going to Tzfat, please tell me what I can rely on, and you know the person you're speaking to has your high standards.
I'll take it first. I'll take it short. Okay, that's a difficult question. First of all, as follows. There is, and I'm going to be careful, and I hope that people don't understand this as a criticism. I don't mean it this way at all. There is a difference in the policies in Eretz Yisrael and America, the way the kashrus organizations work. In America, things are much more transparent. Americans in general are the type that they kind of they're much more open. As a people, I think we're much more open. And I think the kashrus organizations are that way also. So it's much easier to kind of know what's going on by Yenum, because there's a lot of open communication between kashrus organizations that we have over here. You know, I'm not representing the Chof-K, that was my other disclaimer, but someone that is associated loosely with the Chof-K and with the OU, standing at the same table. My brother's best friend probably is Rabbi Moshe Elephant, one of his closest friends. Is the head of the OU, the head of the OK city eulogy on my father. In America, that's the way they work. Eretz Yisrael doesn't work that way. It's a different way of working. There's less of information about what's exactly going on inside. We don't have as clear of a picture. So it's a little bit harder for us to have really a list that everyone's going to agree on. I don't think everyone's going to have like one list that we're going to say like all the people agree about this list. There was a story that happened with myself and Rabbi Wiener. There was a restaurant here in Yerushalayim. It's not important which one for the moment because this goes back many years. And they let us into their kitchen. I went into the kitchen with Rabbi Wiener. This is a place where a lot of people were under the assumption they were able to eat. It was a disaster. Sheba disaster, what was going on in that kitchen. What we saw, what we heard, so much problems, and when we like informed the public that it's not a place people should be eating, and I got calls from like mamish from the frumest of the frum people that ate in this restaurant because they didn't know, they were under the impression that it was okay. It was terrible. I'll tell you how terrible, the most terrible thing is that the mashgiach wasn't even telling them when people asked him what meat they were using, he was lying. He was lying about the meat. And the owner of the restaurant said to the mashgiach, why are you lying? The owner was fry, he was not religious. And he said, because if I tell him the truth, no one's going to eat here. This is what happened. This was happening. It was horrible. It was mamish. It was like the things that, it was a disaster. They said to me afterwards, it says, you know what our big mistake was? That we let you into our kitchen. We should have never let you in. Because then no one would know, right? So it makes it much harder. Now they worked a lot on trying to fix up their problems, whatever it was, in that restaurant. That's not my point. My point is that it is a little bit harder to get a clear list. And I don't think that everyone's going to have the same. I know that Rabbi Wiener does have a list. His ZNT Kosher has a list which you can access in different places, but it's a limited list, and that's based on his whatever research he's done. But I think that you're not going to find here the same way that you have in America, like a clear picture. Krakowski.
Even in America, I'm not sure that the hashgachas are too eager to answer about other hashgachas. It becomes tricky. You have to be careful when you're doing that. Also from a legal vantage point. When you're answering from a place of authority, you ask your Rav and Shul, about something, you say, okay, he was a Rav and Shul, so he told you I wouldn't eat this, I wouldn't eat that, or, you shouldn't eat this, or you shouldn't eat that, that's fine. The second it comes from a place of authority, somebody who's, is supposed to be, a major player in Kashrus, it becomes a little bit more difficult. With that being said, so, for friends, I think, I do try to answer those emails, Rabbi Grant. But all that aside, we do have, the OU has started about 2.5 years ago, we started a Kashrus hotline. I don't remember the number by heart. It's available, I think, on the OU, is definitely on the OU Israel website. I think there's a link also from OU Kashrus in America, where we have somebody who tries to answer those questions, I think within half a day or something like that. Again, if it's about another hashgacha, is it fine or not fine? You usually will not get an answer about something like that if it's such a direct question. If it's, sometimes there's ways to answer questions without answering the question. That's number one. Number two is that, it's sometimes there's a different, we had a mashgichim in a hotel here. An excellent mashgiach. Garatayr Chaver Minor. And he used to tell me he was very funny. He was nifter, but he was a very, very funny person, wonderful sense of humor. And he said one of his favorite things was when people would come over to him by Shal Shudas time after being in the hotel the whole Shabbos. And they'd ask him, is the kashrus really okay here? So he had a few answers that he would answer him. Sometimes like, you didn't order the kosher option? Right? My first the ganze Shabbos, if you come, you ask me, by Shal Shudas time, right? What are you asking about? The stale herring and the crackers? You ate the cholent and you ate little Shabbos, the duck and whatever it was, right? And now you're coming to ask me about the stale herring, right? What are you asking? So sometimes when people ask questions, very last minute, it's not so bakrept, it's not comfortable for somebody to answer the question. Somebody's getting these long emails from people with a whole food itinerary. They're planning a trip to Eretz Yisrael for their son's bar mitzvah or their grandson's bar mitzvah, whatever it is, and the whole entire extended family is coming, and they send you this itinerary. They paid somebody a lot of money to make the itinerary for them. They put a lot of thought into that itinerary. You see there's exact times, exact restaurants, everything worked out there, and you look at it, 90% of the places there, you wouldn't think about going into. So what are you going to turn around and ruin this person's ganze itinerary? So it sometimes, it also depends how the questions are asked by those asking the questions, how the answers will be received.
I just wonder, there's so many hechsher in the world, you can see from Switzerland, Germany, tons in Israel, America, England, and sometimes you have no idea what this hechsher is about. So is there a sort of a b'diavad position that no hechsher has got like a Rav's name and a beis din, you would expect to be a respectable place, like the Rav of Switzerland, the beis din of Germany? Is there an assumption that, can we assume it's not treif? Or is there anything that's known that, no, I don't know if you want to say now, this you have to avoid? So an Israeli hechsher, that's what I was wondering.
I think Rabbi Center answered that before. That is it not? Can you say it's treif? It's very hard to say anything that somebody who seems to be a from yid and seems to be a talmud chacham says that it's kosher. It's hard to see. It's hard to go and say that it's treif. Doesn't mean never, but in general, it's hard to say that. With that being said, so I think there is, in theory, there's definitely a cheskes kashrus to Rav. It means that you're already taking into account that it's certified, that somebody, it's not a self-certification, v'chuli. However, the shaila is who made this person the rabbi of whatever city it is also. Not everybody who is the first Jew out in Timbuktu, I don't know, maybe there's already somebody in Timbuktu, but if tomorrow you go there, right, and you proclaim yourself to be the chief rabbi, there was a tkufa I was getting emails, I travel a lot in the Arab world. So there's a tkufa I was getting emails and messages and all sorts of things about somebody who was claiming to be the chief rabbi of an Arab country that definitely has no known Jewish community there, right? So okay, he's self-proclaimed chief rabbi. I happen to have been there before him, so maybe I'm the chief rabbi. But with all that being said, I don't know what made him the chief rabbi. So, not everybody who just writes, chief rabbi or whatever it is, okay, because who's contending with him? Who said he's not? So you can be a self-proclaimed rabbi. But if somebody is a rav of a real kehillah or whatever it is, so there's definitely a certain amount of emunah that it's certainly not treif. Is that what you want to rely on? Again, when you're planning a trip, you should look into it beforehand.
Okay, I just want to tell you, you should understand that kashrus is a multi-million-dollar industry. Now, I'm not complaining about that, but it is. And in general, there's, when we're dealing with the question of kashrus, there's money involved, and people, there are temptations when it comes to money. And for that reason, you have to know who you're relying on. There are people, I remember used to call my father and say, like, anything you don't want to give a hechsher on, just send our way. Because they're making money. And the way that the kashrus world is set up, so there's checks and balances. There's checks and balances because everyone's making money. So you say, okay, so why should you rely on anyone? The answer is because there's a lot more at stake for the OU, for the Chof-K, than this one person who's gonna try to cheat on cut a corner in this one product. So their whole reputation relies on their being honest. But someone who's all he's got is a very small little operation. So for him, it is tempting. And if you don't know who you're relying on, it makes things challenging. I want to give you an example of something which I didn't understand. And do you remember when there was that story in Lakewood? There was a restaurant outside of Lakewood, and they caught them doing trafe stuff. I don't remember what it was called. Right, that. So I called my brother up afterwards, and I asked him, explain to me what's going on. Because someone was upset at the kashrus organization for what happened. He said, you have to understand that people are trying, especially if there are people that you cannot rely on, they're trying to do these violations, and it can be tricky. Listen to an example. There was a shipment of egg rolls that was coming in to a restaurant. And my brother told me this story, and the box looked a little banged up. And the mashgiach said, okay, I want to open up the box, because the box it just didn't look right. There was something about the box he didn't like. So he opened up the box, and it's egg rolls. It's like, okay, it's got Efsher on the box. And he starts pulling out the egg rolls. Underneath, there was a big box. Underneath the box was treif chicken. What they did is they opened the box from the bottom, and they put chicken in the bottom, and they put egg rolls on the top. This is the owner of the restaurant was doing this. Now, you think, you're running a restaurant. He's like, is that really that? But money, when it comes to, people making extra money, so they'll do all different types of tricks to try to, and if you're not a good mashgiach, that you can pick up on something like that can slip through your fingers. So, when it comes to the world of kashrus, there is a decent amount at stake when it comes to that. And therefore, it's important to know who the Rav is that you're trusting when it comes to giving a reliable hechsher.
Is the OU in Israel the same level of supervision as the OU in America?
I'm going to let Rabbi Krakowski deal with that question.
So, it's easy for me to answer. It's a better level than the OU in America. not because I'm putting down Khalil the OU in America. It's the same OU. Really, let me rewind and re-answer the question. First, explain to me what that means, the OU in America and the OU in Eretz Yisrael. If the question is, are the places we're certifying in Eretz Yisrael on the same level as in America or not, it's a better level. If the question was, the OU in Eretz Yisrael versus the OU in America, there's only one OU. So the question's not a question. Meaning, my hierarchy, I'm standing here, the people who I work for is Rabbi Genek and Rabbi Elephant. They probably have, Rabbi Elephant for sure, has more involvement daily in what's going on in Eretz Yisrael than he probably has in any other country in the world. Meaning, because there's less layers of people in between, so it's a very, very direct channel. And the people who work in the office, the way I ended up in the OU in Eretz Yisrael was I was very close to Belski Zechron of Brocha, and he was really the one who pushed me in here. So, it comes from a Kosher to the Paiskim, it comes from a Kosher to the direct Kosher to Rabbi Elephant or Rabbi Genek, and so it's really the same OU. In terms of the standards here, we didn't come to Eretz Yisrael. This way precedes my working for the OU in Eretz Yisrael. It goes back about 40-something years ago. Rabbi Genek was actually the first person to come. And there were a few companies that OU certified already years ago. It was mamish years ago. Karma Mizrahi, the OU certified, for many, many, many years. Karma Wines. There were companies that they certified for many years before that. But Rabbi Genek came, he had an invitation actually of the state of Israel to help Israeli companies export to America. I figured there are companies here are kosher, why not zone in on that market in America for kosher? But they understood that in order to get into the American market, you need to have an American hashgacha. It was soon after Rabbi Genek started working for OU, he came to Eretz Yisrael and he made that original relationship. When Rabbi Elephant was hired for OU, that was one of the profiles that he took for himself was Eretz Yisrael, and since then he's been extremely involved. From the days of Rav Reuben, that Rav Reuben was the head, so to speak, of OU Kashrus in Eretz Yisrael, until today, with all the different gilgulim in between. Rabbi Elephant always dealt with it, very, very personally. But that was originally what they came to Eretz Yisrael for. Whenever the OU took on a project in Eretz Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, they needed an amasla to take on that project. They had to feel that they're positioned uniquely to be the ones that could certify such a product. One example would be the Strauss, the elite chocolates, that the Chav Yisrael for Reuben, for Strauss is coming from an OU company, and because of various different political concerns, the only hashgacha that everybody agreed to certifying elite chocolate was basically the OU. So we certified because we were able to bring up the standards. Elite wasn't Chav Yisrael beforehand, only Megadim with the Eid HaChareis was Chav Yisrael. We were able to bring up the standards of all elite chocolate to be Chav Yisrael, and that Chav Yisrael, all the other ingredients are the same for all the other things. There's certain products that one hashgacha doesn't make or whatever it is because they don't make that line with them. There's not enough of a bikush in the neighborhoods where they're using such products. So Bekitzer, the OU was the answer to that question, and it's the same exact level as having Strauss dairy products like Danone yogurts with Rav Reuben or something like that on it, but it's the chocolates. That's one example. Another example where restaurants were, especially at some point in time, the Eid HaChareis and other very mahadran hashgachas in Eretz Yisrael were so interested in certifying a regular restaurant because they didn't want to have to deal with the shilas arum. Tzniya shilas and music shilas and taruvas shilas and all these types of things, which in general in Chutz La'aretz we didn't get too involved in. Secondly, when it comes to a restaurant, everybody in Eretz Yisrael has this thing that they only allow their hashgachos. It's a very simple thing. It has to be, in order to make the kashrus lucrative when there's so much competition, you have to have that your places only use your hashgacha. And true, there's also a kashrus vantage point to that, which is you want to be able to control the whole sharsheret, the whole chain of products coming into the restaurant, that you're familiar with the suppliers, v'chulei, so it's easier to pick up on inconsistencies and minor issues. Like, can you do with the story of Monsey, right? If the whole chain had been certified by one hashgacha, it probably would have been caught earlier. So there's kashrus concerns to be taken into account in that sense as well. But the OU has a relationship with many, many manufacturers here in Eretz Yisrael because of the export vantage point. Therefore, we have a relationship with many of the Israeli hashgachos, and we're at least quasi-involved in many of the shlitos, and therefore we were able to allow more shlitas, all on very mahadran levels, so to speak. So that was something which was more attractive maybe for some restaurants. So too with hotels. Hotels was also, we felt, there's an importance for our tzibur coming from America to Eretz Yisrael. They don't have a home. They need somewhere to stay. They need somewhere kosher. Halavai, we should have more hotels. But right now, as we have the two that we have, and that's really the aspect which I'll mention. The Jerusalem Garden and the Ramada hotels. I'll mention something though. We always, in America, when the OU gets asked questions about kashrus, one of the things we say is the tzibur creates the standards. That's why kashrus education is so important. Right? I think the famous words of Cy Sims, right, in his Sims store was an educated consumer is our best customer. But what raises the standards of kashrus is the tzibur demanding a higher standard of kashrus. And I think I said this a few months ago, not too far off geographically of a location. Probably somewhat guilty of the same thing. But when you go to a hotel on Ben Hazmanim, that the kashrus is lousy. But you stay there anyway. And you eat breakfast anyway. So you only eat the cold stuff. You spoke to the mashgiach, and you only eat, the whole fresh sliced vegetables and things like that. Not the leafy vegetables that might have bug issues. And you don't touch anything that was cooked there. Maybe if you spoke to the mashgiach and he tells you the cheese that was used in the omelets, and the omelets are always bishul Yisrael, this and that. So maybe you have an omelet, maybe not, depending again exactly how scrupulous you want to be and what you're choshish for and everything like that. But you go there lamaisa and you have breakfast, and you don't leave breakfast too hungry. It probably lasted you through when you usually have lunch because you only had chatzi pension, right? So lamaisa, we're not encouraging any hotel to get a better hashgacha. When you do that, certainly if you come for Shabbos and you fresh over Shabbos, ala geshmak esek, because you spoke to the mashgiach and told you only this meat is the one with an issue, which agav, there are very often bishul b'Shabbos shilos that need to be taken into account when it comes to hotels. There's a whole slew of them, because over here there's a ton of Torah Shabbat Peh. They'll tell you they spoke to, that they have a Messiah from this Rav, and that used to be a Rav in Yerushalayim. He said it was fine. One time Rabbi Zecharia came into their kitchen 30 years ago, and that they were doing the exact same thing. Narishkeiten, that type of oven or warmer or whatever it was, didn't exist 30 years ago. And Rabbi Zecharia said that it was the most kosher kitchen that he's ever seen in his whole entire life. Hen mebchinat hakashrus, hen mebchinat the Shabbos, v'chulei. So they have all sorts of things like that. Rabbi Belsky used to always tell me, if somebody quotes the psak, it doesn't make sense, don't believe it. If it's not in writing from that paisik that they're quoting to you, and it doesn't make sense, just assume he never said it. So there's a ton of this that goes around in these types of areas. So aside from kashrus, there's all the Shabbos issues, which are not any less important, very often, sometimes even more important, than a lot of the kashrus issues taken into account. It could be a shayla deiraisa, not just a derabanan like bishul akel. Not that I'm minimizing the derabanan. So back to the standards of the OU, yes, it's the same as in America, plus because over here we're makbid on Afiyas Yisrael, which we're not makbid on America, we're makbid on Yashan, which we're not makbid on America, although Rabbi Belsky used to say we're makbid on Yashan in America. Just after Pesach, we'll all be Yashan. We're makbid on Chov Yisrael here in Eretz Yisrael, prat to a few flavors of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which that has a whole shtickle Torah for it, but that's the only exception. Okay, and it's the toppings. The ice cream's taka Chov Yisrael. And we are makbid on certain areas where we have certain, I guess if you want to call it kulos or lack of chumros, in terms of shayos and bishul akum, what requires bishul akum or not. So here we're much more machmir in terms of many of those shayos, like tuna.
Sure. As far as your shayla, as far as the Chof-K, it's the same in American Eretz Yisrael. It's exactly the same.
Juices that say 100% juice, like orange juice and apple juice, is that always permitted to drink? Like, for example, on airport, on planes, and wherever you go to travel?
If the shaila is mutter, yes, it's mutter to drink. Is a shaila is a kosher lechatchila? Not necessarily. What do you mean by that? Again, in a juice plant, there can be lots of juices. Grape juice is subject to all the dinim of stam yeno. So a plant that manufactures multiple types of juices, itachen, it's highly likely that they're also one of the more lucrative juices to manufacture is grape juice. It's very likely that they also manufacture grape juice, which means it might very well be pasteurized in the same pasteurizer. It might be bottled hot. There might be certain residual amounts for certain types of juices, because they can just write, it may contain traces of other juices or things like that, and get away with it. So it becomes a little bit more complex if you're talking again about a lechatchila type of level. But mutter, yes, it certainly is. It's kind of like the coffee shilas on the planes. Everybody's familiar with one of the number one shots for a whole bunch of years that anybody traveling to America or back to America would ask us about Starbucks. Right? So without getting into that whole thing, and you can read on it, anywhere you look for kashrus, there's an article about the Starbucks coffee. Every kashrus agency, had it out on the Starbucks coffee, all the different stuff. Lamaisa, the shaila is the same on every airplane. Okay? Every airplane, including El Al, which is perceived as being more kosher, and it is in a lot of ways. All their kitchens have hashgacha on it. Most of them are certified by very good hashgacha agencies. Okay? But there are issues with the dishwashers. If equipment goes into a dishwasher, and it's a shared dishwasher, so again, there are svaris lahakel on the dishwashers because they put in soap, and it's lahedia washing it off, and there's a lot of stuff that you don't want, so there's all sorts of shilas about if it's pogum or not. Again, Rabbi Belsky, the way he was mechanech everybody in OU is that if it doesn't taste mamish pogum, that you'd spit it out the second it comes into your mouth, it tastes totally not palatable, then it's not really pogum. So, I just added this, we're kashering the wineries now after heter mechira wine. So some of the wineries were asking about the exact level, if they use caustic soda as a chomer pogum, what percentage, what's the equation that they need to have of the caustic soda mixed with water. So it's going through the shaila. At the end of every psak din we have about it, where there's certain numbers listed for a pH or whatever it is, it says, but the mashgiach should taste the water to make sure that it's pogum. Okay, not all the mashgichim here like to hear that. I think we're the only one that asked for that. So I told them if they don't want, they can schedule in advance, and we'll make sure somebody from the office is there, and we're all fine with it. So back to the coffee on the airplanes, you have the same exact shiloh, because when they go around with that carafe and offer you coffee tea, that went into a dishwasher. The dishwasher they have to use a dishwasher in the airport, because they're not allowed to take it out for security reasons and things like that. Those dishwashers, so in theory, maybe they could do in some of the airports either chazanish is achshara of kashering twice, something which is a ben yomer, the first time with chomer pogum, so that it makes it kilu and ain't a ben yomer, and then you kasher a second time, v'chulei. It's very hard, they have to have enough time, etc. That's usually not going to be done. It's certainly not when you're traveling a not kosher airline, which is every other airline. So that was washed in a dishwasher. So it's true, the coffee's all kosher, but it was washed in a dishwasher that wasn't kosher. Rabbi Belsky would always tell people they should take their own instant coffee. There's a spout in the kitchen that hot water comes out of the wall. That doesn't go into a dishwasher. So he'd say, take your own instant coffee in your own paper cup, ask him for a paper cup, your own hot cup, and make a coffee on the plane. And he said he was always super proud to pull out his plastic bag with some coffee grinds that he brought from his house. So again, b'diavad, and he said, b'diavad it's for sure mutter, because of a whole bunch of different svars. But Lamaisa, if somebody's a Baal Nefesh, so they can, they should also think about the coffee, not just the orange juice on the plane. Anyway, the low cost don't offer you juice anymore.
If one is visiting a hotel here or in the States with a family, hazmanim, whatever, and it's a from place, maybe not badatz, and also not fried. People go there. What would you suggest should be the top key questions to ask the mashgiach, the kitchen staff, or whatever, to feel a little more secure, here or in America, or both?
Okay. So that's an excellent question. You got a round of applause for that.
I think you just saved half the questions.
And what I would like to start with the following thing. I'm going to let Rabbi Krakowski deal with most of it, but what we mentioned before, to be an educated customer is very important. And it's important to know who you're speaking to and to try to understand like what the background is. I'm going to give you an example, and this, you might not like this, and I'm sorry for doing this, but I was away with my wife, and we were in a hotel. It wasn't it wasn't a OU hotel. It wasn't a I'm not sure, but
too many options.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, it's definitely not in Yerushalayim. Anyway, so I always ask for the mashgiach. Always, even if we didn't end up eating there, but I asked for the mashgiach, and I spoke to the mashgiach. I asked him, what are the vegetables? Because that's a great question. So he said to me, vegetables are abrafrati. It was a little odd to me because it wasn't anywhere near here. It was far. It was over an hour away. Rabbi Frati is my neighbor, so I called Rabbi Frati. He said, I could give you my word, there's not one vegetable with my hechsher that ever went into this hotel. Never happened. So why am I saying that you might not like this? Because, so people say, okay, so what should we do? But so to me, it's not just a question of what the questions you're asking, but also who you're speaking to. I saw this person, I said, I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with this. And you might say, okay, so so what am I supposed to do? So if a person is the type that asks these questions, I remember one time I was at an affair. I walked into the dining room, into the kitchen. I'm sorry. I asked him, what the hechsher is over here. So he told me the hechsher, and there was sitting right next to me. There was a bottle that was dripping, and I said, "Is this under your hechsher? This bottle?" He looks at me. He goes, "What is this doing here?" I'm like, he asked the guy, "What is this doing?" Because it didn't have a good hechsher. And he's like, "Get this out of here right now." So my point is that there are times when the people that you're speaking to, if you don't feel that they're reliable, they know what you want to hear. They know what you want, especially in Eretz Yisrael. They know what they have to say. And I was talking once to a person who used to be a owner of a restaurant, and so he tells me, he says, "My friends, they all keep a package of gush katif under their the front counter to show you, see, this is gush katif. They don't have gush katif. They just show it to everybody. They have one package of gush katif just that everyone should know." That's what he told me, a store owner. So that makes it a little complicated. So what are you saying? So you can't trust anyone? No, I'm not saying that. When you're in a matziv, I think you're asking in a b'diavad matziv when you have to go with family or something like that. What are you supposed to do? So aside for the important questions, is to know if there's someone that I feel comfortable who's answering these questions. Because if not, then the answers are, in my opinion, irrelevant. They know what you want to hear, and they know what they have to say, and it's a complicated situation. But like I said, there's a tremendous amount of money that's at stake here. And for that reason, sometimes people that themselves don't care what they're giving you will tell you it's okay. The worst answer that I've heard a number of times, because people go in and say, I ask them like, what hechsher? It's kosher. I'm like, what hechsher? It's kosher. I'm like, okay, I know I for sure can't eat here. It's like, you won't tell me what hechsher it is. I had one time I had a talmud who his family was his in-laws were going out to a restaurant, and he was very uncomfortable, and so we went to the restaurant beforehand. I went with him, and we asked the mashgiach, what hechsher is the food? He says the lamb, and he said the name of the hechsher. That was pretty good. The rest of the meat wasn't good. The lamb, I said, okay, can you bring the lamb, please? Can we see it? And we waited, and we waited, and we waited till finally it came up, and he said, it's a different hechsher. I was wrong. It's the wrong hechsher. So those are the horror stories. There are also good stories for sure, but it's not just a question of like Rabbi Krakowski mentioned, just check off the list. Like, what do I ask? And if I know the answer, so then I'm good. When you're not relying on a reliable hechsher, you're putting yourself in a place where you're kind of like, you've got to use a lot of your own intuition of whether or not I'm going into something I really want to enter into. And then there's a question of what are the right questions to ask. Rabbi Krakowski, it's all yours.
When I first came to OU in Eretz Yisrael, the staff in Eretz Yisrael wasn't nearly as large as it is today. So I had the schus of being able to impart whatever knowledge I maybe accrued over the years. I'm working now. I'll be finishing my 14th year for OU Kashrus in Eretz Yisrael. So I've had this chus to impart some information to people in the office also. So there was a fellow that came about 3 years ago to work in the office, and I took, I looked at the companies we had, and I gave him a few routes of companies, of plants that he was responsible to start doing the kashrus inspections. There's a mashgichim in each plant, but on behalf of the OU, we send somebody from the office throughout the year periodically to check up, to make sure that everything is as should be. So he was very excited about one of the companies that he was assigned to, which I wasn't surprised. It sounds geschmack. But this company, the other hashgachos that work there are the greatest hashgachos. And I told him, I said, I want to explain to you something. They needed us, I explained to them why they needed us for certain products and whatever it is. But I said, overall, this company, you know that the hashgacha here in Eretz Yisrael is not the greatest. It has a bedat, but not one of the, it's not Eida Charedis, and it's not Landau either, it's not Reuben. So so I told him, I want to explain to you something. Anybody, about 7-8 years ago, I was sitting with an administrator of the Strauss Group, and he told me, he says, we're constantly reviewing everything in marketing. He said, and we do sometimes also review the kashrus in terms of the marketing. And he told me, we did our own seker shuk of kashrus, 96% of the kosher market in Eretz Yisrael eats Eida Charedis. He says, after that, he told us 70-something% with Reuben. So it was a drop of like 20% between Eida Charedis and Reuben. So he said, you have to understand, for us to take any other hashgacha other than Eida Charedis on one of our products, we have to have a really good reason to do that, because you're losing out a significant share of the kosher market. So I explained to this Rav who started working for us then, I told him, I said, any time a company doesn't have a really good hashgacha as their main Israeli hashgacha, zomer der sheni. Meaning, because if you can meet the higher standard, you're going to. It's the same thing with hotels and restaurants. So anybody who has this type of vision that they're going to go to a hotel somewhere or a restaurant, in some random city, and it doesn't have a particularly good mahadran hashgacha, and they're going to be able to go in and speak to the mashgiach, and they're going to be able to really eat well, they're wrong. Because if it was really so good, they would go. I just had this past week, I went to a restaurant that was interested in getting OU certification, and I knew before I walked in, I asked them if I can see the menu. That was the first thing I did when I went. I was chayshish already because the type of restaurant, there were going to be certain items on the menu. So I saw he had hearts, right? So Ashkenazim don't eat hearts. The truth is, Rav Shechter told us that it's a Kaf Chaim. It is a Kaf Chaim, but he thought that Tzvarim also shouldn't. The Kaf Chaim also says that even on chicken hearts, that it's kosher shikha. Fine. The hearts, they actually prepared for the kashering well. But what were the issues here? They kasher liver, they kasher hearts. They don't wash the liver after kashering the liver. And he thought it was the most absurd thing when I told him, would you be willing to wash the liver after? He said, of course not, it would ruin the liver. He said, if you come in and you ask me to wash your livers after I kasher it, I'd be willing to wash yours because you're eating it. But that I should do that for all the livers, it's going to ruin it. Okay, so they weren't washing it after the achshar, it's a mafurish Ramah. They weren't, then it came to, they also weren't makbid on gimel yomim, and they were frying it afterwards in some of the manot. They make a murav Yerushalayim with the hearts and the livers, all fried afterwards, and they're not makbid on gimel yomim. So again, yesham alismoch, although he was only using fresh, so then you don't even have the frozen tziruf in it. So I'm not saying einam alismoch. Yesham alismoch, the Aderes like that, but it's certainly not what's referred to as mahadran. Okay, and that wasn't slimach mas, it was a real, festive frying with lots of onions and proper murav Yerushalayim. Okay, so there wasn't much to be saimach on there. And the other issue was he wasn't willing to have a separate grill. So he had separate spades, it was all on a shipud. So that was fine, and they had good markings. But I explained to him, I said, it's on the same grill. So somebody has their steak being prepared right next to it. And you're going to be, who says there's no dam, be'en, that's going to drip onto that steak? Right? There's nothing to guarantee that. So it was like a horrible setup, but he wasn't going to change that. He told me, unless you guarantee me that I'm going to get another 500 customers a day to my restaurant, so okay, it's probably a guzma. If I could tell him he's going to get 40 more customers, he probably would do it. right? But I'm not in the business of making, Rebbeisha guarantees. So it's not, he wasn't willing to, he's not willing to change those things. So it's very partial. The products are all excellent. He had a mashgiach tamidi from the current hashgacha that he has. Again, was it mamish from opening to closing? I didn't come at mamish opening time or mamish closing time, so I can't tell you. Right? But he had a mashgiach tamidi who was following. I asked the mashgiach tamidi, he said that the hashgacha he works for never asked him any of these drishot. Right? But he's not going to take an OU. And he's certainly not going to take Eid Charedis tomorrow. He told us he one time spoke to Eid Charedis, and Eid Charedis never got back to him. I understand why. Eid Charedis probably asked him the same questions. And he said no, so he didn't see any reason to get back to him. Okay? So maybe I'll be a little nicer and call him up and tell him, I don't think this is going to happen. So that he doesn't tell the next hashgacha, though, you never called him back. But that's about it. So it's not going to be that it's almost perfect and you can eat almost everything there, and it's just going to be that, they use cinta or filet, they use some sort of hindquarter cut, and that's the one thing you're not going to eat. It's not usually just one little thing that passes up the right hashgacha. With that, all that being said, so there are questions a person can ask about, try to pick things, it's okay, you're there, and you need to eat something for breakfast. So there are things that are apt to being okay. It's a lot of bread, right? I'm not talking about any haramim on angels or anything like that. In this sense, no. I think it's a very, very chashuv azach. Chas v'shalom, not being mezalzel on that. But in terms of kashrus, right? Most of the big bakeries in Eretz Yisrael have a decent hashgacha, and most restaurants, most hotels for sure, not necessarily restaurants, aren't baking their own breads from scratch and things like that. So it could be that the breads are fine. So if you start to work out certain things to ask about. So you can ask him, what brand is the bread? Or is the bread baked here? And ask a few questions so that it should be Mesiach Lefi Tumo, that he doesn't necessarily know exactly where you're going with the question. Don't say, what hashgacha does the bread have? Say, what bakery is the bread from? Right? Ask more around about those types of questions. If vegetables that are fine, if it's not Shemitah here, so the vegetables should be fine aside from churros and maizes, so Iber meiser. What's the big deal? You don't have to get into, and if there's fruits that are l'shas, avoid them. And if it's Shemitah, so then, avoid things. Don't assume that a hotel that doesn't have mahadrin is going to be answering to a higher authority when it's cheaper not to. And the heter mechira fruits and vegetables are much cheaper than the mahadrin fruits and vegetables. So don't assume that they're going to be doing anybody a favor and getting something better if they don't need to. I want to add something. There's this perception that Yom Tov time, a lot of hotels in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, they step up their kashrus for Sukkot or for Pesach, when there's tourists that are coming, Erlecha, Bahimta mention, that are coming for Yom Tov, and they want the best and change the hotel with the best and change the hashgacha. It would be nice if it worked that way. But again, a mashgiach can only be as strong as the hierarchy that stands behind him. So if push comes to shove, they can try to get better shlitas for sukkahs. They usually use kashrut regila, non-glat meats, or whatever, rabbanut meats and chickens and things like that, and they step it up, they try to get from 2 or 3 badatzim. But what happens when they don't have it? Well, there's something in inventory and they need a little bit more, there were more people that came, right? What's going to happen? They're going to use it and there's nobody that's going to stop them because there's no tu'udah that's coming down because they used it. Okay, that's number one. Number two is the hergelim of the workers in the kitchen. If they're not used to having to have the mashgiach open and close the oven, or if they're not used to having the 2 Jewish workers that work in a kitchen of 30 workers do all the cooking, they're still going to do the cooking. So it's a hergel that you can't, it's very, 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 very hard to break unless you have like a full team of mashgichim that are coming in for there. So if they didn't take a special hashgacha, or there's somebody additional from outside, not because the person from outside has a magic trick, because it's something that's his job to be doing that. It's unlikely, and the same thing with all these hazmanim programs, if it's just something like that, there's no magic wand. There's a lot that needs to be invested in changing that. So if there's somebody who did a really good job, it can be done. But it needs to be thorough, it needs to be planned out, and it needs to be somebody, a real gavar rabba behind it, not just, I don't mean a gavar rabba that he's, the goladar, but somebody who understands what he's doing and has the personality to go in and really get done what needs to be done. But without that, don't expect it to be done.
So I just want to clarify, if I could. Can I clarify? Just a few things. Rabbi Krakowski, so would you say that products that are coming into the hotel, like for example bread or other things, butter, or simple things like eggs, is something that is, if a person's in a situation where it's more, where he feels like he needs to eat something, that would be easier for a person to not have trouble as much as with meats or anything that's going to be cooked together with on a grill or something of that sort. Like vegetables maybe, because that's all prepared separately. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's things that are, there's things that are more brought-in products. That's more apt, especially if most of the products like that in the marketplace are kosher. And what I tell people is most breads are certified with Krakowski. Most of the soft cheeses, meaning cream cheese, cottage cheese, comes from Tnuva, Tara, and Strauss, which are all have mahadran on all of those products. Either the Chareis or Madran or Reuben or whatever, but they're all, pretty much all of them are with Lisa and Ashkachas. The second it starts coming to cheeses that are more complicated, even the regular yellow cheese, there are companies that make it here in Israel or import it for very cheap from other places, and the import it can be mamish problematic for a whole slew of reasons which are beyond the scope of this question and answer session to get into, right? That can be very problematic. So there, unless you know for sure that it's coming from, from one of the ones that are fine, don't assume it's fine. So too with the salty cheeses, as they call it, like the, Bulgarit and all these types of things. Vegetables, again, plain vegetables, that obviously they're not growing them in the hotel. And again, maximum take choros and maisus. Those are fine. The second it gets to cooked products, there's no two kitchens. So it becomes complicated. If for whatever reason somebody does need to eat a cooked product, what I'll tell you is like this, okay? There's very few treif chickens on the market in Eretz Yisrael. It's a shiloh, how mahoda the chickens are. With that being said, Reb Shai Portnoy told me that he heard from Shem Zalman that it's always better to eat the meat option because the meat has the siyat d'shmai of a whole tzibur, right? You share a cow, many people eat from a cow. A chicken, 2 people eat from. So he said there's more siyat d'shmai in it. But that would only be if you don't know the standards. So again, because this cannot know shreifa chicken in Eretz Yisrael, chicken is be'etzim safer than the beef option. But again, it was cooked in the same kalim, there's only one kitchen, bishul akum, all those shayas might still be there. But again, Rabbi Rabinowitz, who's very senior in the OU Kashrus, was a talmud of Shem Zalman, and he says he heard Mipi Kodshe from Shem Zalman many times that, because of covered brias and these types of things, if you're in a sticky situation, you can eat the things that aren't, on the highest levels of kashrus. So I'm not asking each of those situations should be asked individually. If somebody has one of these difficult childs, their parents, their grandparents, their uncle, aunt, their brother, sister, whatever it is, and something very planned out, and they spent a lot of money on it. If they don't eat, then whatever it is, those childs should be asked individually. And each situation might be different. Those should be asked individually.
Okay, I want to clarify one more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing quickly that Rabbi Krakowski said. Just to understand, when Yom Tov comes, so we hope that they upgrade their kashrus, but there is a tremendous stress on the industry when Yom Tov comes. There are so many tourists here, so many people that want like a high level of kashrus, that I know for a fact that it's extremely difficult for them. Now you're talking about hotels that they need customer service, they need to provide the goods. There is no hechsher that's requiring them to give something on a higher level, and there's just no meat in the market. You don't have enough mahadran lamb in the market for them to supply for all of the American tourists. So what are they going to do? Is that right, Rabbi Krakowski? One of the things that we're talking about, that's one of those issues. So for that reason, if you don't know that they're being held to that standard and there's no tuda coming down, so what the mashgichim have told us is we try to do mahadran, some of these mashgichim, some of these hotels, whatever it might be. I'm not focusing on anyone in particular. But if we don't have mahadran, we don't have mahadran. What are we going to do? The hotel has to continue to function because they're not. That isn't their official standard. So I personally think that it could be Yom Tov is even worse than the rest of the time because it's not there. The products are just not, they're not accessible. So they don't have a choice. They're going to have to give you a lower standard of kashrus.
Okay, the hour is very late, so we're going to try to keep the questions simpler and the answers shorter. But the question that was asked was, what about somebody not going in Eretz Yisrael, they're going to Chutz La'aretz, and they're perhaps going to someplace where third world and they allow you to bring your own fish that you picked up from the market and they're going to do whatever they're going to do. what can you do in a treif resort? Mamish treif. That's the question that was asked.
So I wasn't here before I came, obviously. And I think that the Rav Shliza was going to talk about appropriateness of such places, so I'll leave that aside. When you're traveling, I'll address a different question. If somebody's traveling for business and they have to stay in an ostensibly treif place, but they're accommodating to them. You know, if you're a royal, in some of these Arab countries, if you're a royal guest, they treat you royally. Including that they kneel when they serve you. What can you do in such situations? So yes, if you can get fish with the scale still on it, right? And so you wash off the fish. If they have a brand new frying pan and you light the fire, or you cook it on a brand new frying pan, that's one option. If you at least triple or quadruple wrap it in aluminum foil on all sides and edges, and put it into an oven, just maybe with a little bit of salt and pepper and lemon on top of it or something like that. That's fine. So again, basic fruits and vegetables. Usually, if it's a nice hotel, they'll get for you a brand new knife, a brand new cutting board. You can bring it back to your room and bring it back to the kitchen for them to cut for you. The next time, it's good for you to go in and watch that being done, or have them do it outside somewhere for you. And then again, things like fish and eggs in a brand new frying pan. Either you can buy your own frying pan and take it after each use back to your room, or you can have one they very often have in storage rooms in these places, tons of brand new pots and pans. Best is obviously chad pami. If not chad pami, glass, and you should try to find glass in the bottom of the pile that probably wasn't used within the last good while. And cutlery, definitely, just chad pami, or brand new, and then kept aside and washed separately for yourself. So there are ways around that with very, very basics. And if they have their own pot, they can cook for you rice or something like that also that's pretty innocuous. With just some salt and pepper or something like that. And there's very, very basic things, the things that are kosher, in pots and pans that are kosher because they're brand new, or things that were triple wrapped in aluminum foil from the very beginning till the end, and that you can monitor that the whole time. And obviously to make sure that all the bishul akum concerns, for Ashkenazim, obviously it's easier to make sure that you turned on the oven. You should know though that most industrial ovens, the second you open the door, it turns off. So if they're apt to open the door in between, if somebody needs more than 2-3 minutes, you should make sure to be there the entire time till it's ready, so that if they open the door, you can be the one to close the door.
Okay, I have a few questions from the ladies section that was sent down. Do you want to see them, and you could? Okay, just one thing I want to mention, because one of the things was the lady said that the stories are very challenging. It's hard for them to hear the stories, and I understand that. I've been telling a bunch of horror stories. There are two things I want to say about that. First of all, the reason why I'm telling the stories is because people can think like, what can go wrong already? What already can go wrong? And it's important to know that a lot of things can and have gone wrong. It's, sometimes people think like, okay, what's the big deal? But it is very complicated. So in order to convey that to you, I've told you just a few. There's plenty more stories. But what I do want to say is that everyone can and probably has made mistakes. Mistakes happen. That doesn't mean that a kashrus organization is not reliable. Everyone, I think, from my experience, because it's almost impossible to be perfect. If you want a perfect, then you should just only eat what you make in your own house, and it probably would be a disaster, by the way, because if you don't know kashrus, then it'll probably be worse than anything else. But I'm saying in theory, it's just, you can't, so even though you're going to hear a story about this, and that's why I would very much not like to tell stories about any particular hechsher, that this story happened to them, that story happened to them. It's going to happen, because it's impossible for anyone to be perfect. The question might be, what is the percentage of stories that are happening in a particular area? Is someone being responsible about what happens or not? But it is something that I think it's important for us to know, that kashrus is something that's complicated and it has to be done by someone who is a professional and knows what they're doing. There's a question here, Rabbi Carlebach, you want to see them? I just want to clarify that you're okay with this question. I think this is an important one here, the top one, right there, the top one.
Just in the interim, I'll be meisef that when it comes to all the stories, they say about all the meifsim with all different, rebbes and babas and adbayim and whatever it is, right, that are zecher true. But they say, you only hear about when the meifis actually happens. The meifis doesn't happen. It's not a story that makes it to the newspaper. So too, it's any of the stories that you're not going to hear the stories about every time a restaurant goes perfect, right? Most days and most places that are certified by most decent hashgachas, everything goes on perfectly. But those stories aren't going to, illustrate anything per se. So the stories are being brought out now in order to illustrate the issues that can and do come up.
We're just going to finish off with the last couple of questions with some closing remarks. The hour is getting late. What's the deal with the European Triangle K seen here? That's one question. The other question was 7-Eleven in Tel Aviv. Another question was a kashrus professional has been quoted as saying, if you eat OU in America, Rabbanut Mahadran in Yerushalayim is more than fine. I'll let Rabbi Krakowski deal with that. And the last question was...
I'm going to let Motzei Shabbat deal with the first one.
The last question was, with the financial gains for the kashrus organizations, what motivates them to tell you what's good or not? They're getting monetary value out of it. And finally, if there's a $2 on the wall, why am I bothering to ask any questions?
So we're going to have to do that over again.
Everybody?
We're going to have to do that over again. Yeah, I want to do with this triangle K if I could. In general, kashrus organizations are not really going to talk about other ones. That's why Rabbi Krakowski is not going to speak about the triangle K. But I will tell you what I think. I'm not positive, but what I understand is as follows. Triangle K is run by Rabbi Carlebach. The Rabbi Carlebach family here in Eretz Yisrael is very involved in the Rabbanut, and they have very close relations. When I spoke to the people in the Rabbanut about Triangle K, they said to me, and this goes back to what we started with, they said, look, the Triangle K tells us what they rely on, what they don't rely on. They're very transparent, so we know what their standards are. So there's a question of whether or not other people will accept their standard or not. What the Rabbanut's standard is, and this goes back to what we spoke about originally, is trying to get kashrus to the masses, might be their standard, but I don't think that the Triangle K in Eretz Yisrael or in Europe is any different than the Triangle K in America. I don't think that there's a difference between what it is. If a person eats Triangle K in America, I would assume that he should do the same here. If he doesn't eat Triangle K in America, I would assume that the same would be here. The Triangle K does work a lot with some of the organizations, but again, what they're telling me is that they're transparent in telling us what their policies are. Their policies could very well be very different than the OU, OK, Star K, and Chof-K, but at the same time, they're saying that at least they're telling us what their policies are. That's as far as the Triangle K is. That's as much as I think that either of us are going to say about the Triangle K. Is that right? Do you know about 7-Eleven in Tel Aviv?
Not much.
Not much. We don't know about 7-Eleven in Tel Aviv. The other question is the OU and Rabbanut Mahadran.
So I definitely will answer that question. I'm going to share Ma'aseh Shahaya with all the characters in the Ma'aseh Shahaya. Shortly after I started working for OU Kashrus, so Rabbi Elephant from the OU gave me a laundry list of different, maybe it's a zilzal to use the term, but a list of various rabbanim and anshe kashrus in Eretz Yisrael that he felt were worth my while to be in touch with. Some of them that I should learn, the lay of the land in terms of kashrus here in Eretz Yisrael. Some of them because he felt it was important for me for networking purposes, and some of them for the exact converse reason, so they should tell me what they would like the OU to be doing in Eretz Yisrael. It's one of the best aspects of working for OU Kashrus was that it was a stepping stone to meeting many, many chashuv people from the Gedolei Hadar Mamish, and many very chashuv rabbanim from all, from all the chugim, as they say here. And it's a tremendous chus. When I first started working for you, Kashrus, one of the people that Rabbi Alva wanted me to meet was Rabbi Berkowitz. It was a Yitzchak Berkowitz shlita. So I actually had a cousin who was very close to Rabbi Berkowitz then and went with him to Chavrusa. Some of you might remember him, Rabbi Yaakov Meth. So I called him up. He told me impossible, you're not going to be able to get a meeting with him. Maybe 2 minutes after Shachris. You're lucky if you do. Called up another friend of mine who was the guy behind the show. I went through a list of different people that I knew him well. My secretary is his next door neighbor. So my secretary, I gave her the assignment of making sure to go to Rabbi Berkowitz every day and speak to his wife and make sure that I would get an audience with him. And I got an audience. His wife told me I can have 15 minutes with him at some day, at some time, which I told, wow, it's unbelievable. Ended up being an hour and a half. So one of the things he told me then was that he constantly, that somebody who was working for Rabbanot Mahadran at the time, Shmuel Bornstein Shlita, was his neighbor, and would always bother him that how come he tells younger light they shouldn't eat Yerushalayim Mahadran, and but they all eat OU in America. So Rabbi Berkowitz told me he would always answer him the same thing. He says, the OU, I'm not saying the OU is perfect, because he would come with coolest that the OU has, that that they certified this item that has this or that item that has that. He says, listen, I'm not telling you the OU is perfect. Where I can tell you is any time I've called the OU with any of those products that you showed me, any of those shots, they were able to send me back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 tshuvas that were written with nimukim from Gedolei HaPaiskim Mamash. And he said, whenever I ask you a question, I can't get an answer. So he said, it's very simple. Yes, I think they can rely on the OU. It doesn't mean I'll tell them that every last thing I think that every last, younger man should be eating. But I think they can rely on the OU. When it comes to Rabbanot Mahadran, he says, first explain to me exactly what it is, and then I can give you an answer. Okay, so that was a story. I'm quoting the story. You can go back, ask any of the Makairos that you want about the Maisa. That's the Maisa Shahaya. Okay, in terms of, it kind of doesn't even need to be answered. Everybody knows the OU, and everybody knows the OU's Paiskim, past and present. Everybody knows a few Rabbanim probably that work in the OU's office in New York. There's almost 60 Rabbanim. Everybody knows some of them. I mean, now whoever's here sees me. I'm not saying anything about that, but then there's an office here and you can call and speak to us and email us and, that sort of thing. The answer is that. The answer is that the OU is what the OU is. It's transparent. It stands on the shoulders of Gedolei HaPaiskim, especially in the Tchum of Kashrus. And Anshe Miktzaya, people who are mamish fachmen in every single Miktzaya of Kashrus, ad Kutzai Shel Yud in every aspect of Kashrus. So that's that's the OU. And again, so yes, the OU certainly has in certain areas, and Rabbi Belsky, Zecharia Senter would say many times that we have to make a din v'cheshbon everything we don't certify. That if we don't certify it, and there's a reason that it should be certifiable, and people and many people would be soymech on eating it. If we don't certify it, somebody else will certify it. And we'll have to give din v'cheshbon on who will certify it if we don't. So, there's a lot that goes into each one of those decisions in areas where maybe not everybody would want to eat, would accept that standard, whether it's Cholav Stam, whether it's, Pas Palter, or different areas where people maybe are looking for something of a higher standard. I'm not getting into all the finite shilas, about the shellac or whatever other things, right? All those different areas, when there's a festa tzad, lahaka from Gedolei v'chashuvei hapaiskim, we're not going to hide it. It's not going to be something that if you're not a baki in kashrus, you're not going to be able to know about. No, if it's something you want to be makbid on, you will certainly know about it.
Okay, as far as the other question about why should we, if there's so much money, why should we trust the Rabbanim? Is that something like that? Okay, so I think it's important to clarify this, to understand, and I was trying to say this before. Do you know how many products the OU certifies? Over 1.4 million products are certified by the OU.
More by now.
I think it might be every second. It might be more now. It might be another one. You never know. So the OU certifies 1.4 million products. I don't know how many the other Hechsherim, no one's nearly as big as the OU, but it's quite a large number. Chof-K is quite a large number of products. For them to cut a corner on one product because, and to try to to get one extra account, it's not worth it for them if it's going to risk their entire credibility that they're building, that we are Mahadran Hechsher on the highest level, or on a very high level. It's not something that would be wise for them to do. So the temptation of money is not anywhere near someone, if you have a private person who all he's giving is this one hechsher somewhere out, in the boondocks, or he's a mashgiach who's by himself. Well, this is his sole parnasa, is this one thing, and and now he's got to figure out, like, if he steps back, so now he's going to feed his family. It's a whole different story. So the nisyonos of the money when it comes to one of the larger hechsherim, it's not the same in any way. They're trying to build their reputation, and for that reason, they are not tempted to do something which is going to risk their reputation. The other way around, they're trying to always build their reputation and therefore be as reliable as possible. It's much more challenging, and it's a reality of life. That money is tempting is a reality of life. There's a story about Rabbi Zecharia Senter that I like to tell over, that one time he went to visit a Gvir, and the Gvir was walking in and out of the room. He was very busy, and Rabbi Zecharia kept on walking out with him. He said, the Rav can stay, it's okay. He said, I can't stay. So why? Because you have money behind the desk, and it's tempting. I don't want to be in the room with the money by myself. Rabbi Zecharia Senter, right? He was saying, like, Hila is an Isser Yichud with someone else's money. So, and it's your yichud. So when you're dealing with a kashrus organization, it's not yichud. It's far from yichud, right? Because you have the entire the infrastructure that's there to make sure that everything, that there's checks and balances. But when it's an individual person, so then the temptation is much larger. So when someone would ask me, like, I don't eat things that don't have a proper hechsher. There are things that say kol ha-motzerim badatz. That means absolutely nothing to me. So he said, well, you would eat in his house, because in his house, you're not talking about making money. When a person is talking about making money, and they themselves wouldn't necessarily be makbar on badat, so why shouldn't they say kol ha-motzerim badatz? Why shouldn't they say that? If they think if it's kosher, it's kosher. That's what they think. So you wanted me to tell you it's badatz, it makes you feel good, it's badatz. But if something is if a person wants to eat something, and it's important to him, someone else. The other question I was asked is, like, why do I care if it has a $2? Why don't I just eat it? Because to me, kashrus is very important. It's true, I grew up with it. I was mamish in my mother's milk. But, a person eats something that's not kosher, it's timtum alev. Timtum alev means that you're not going to be able to daven right, you're not going to be able to learn right. It's an absolutely beautiful story about the Rabbi Kiva, someone who ate something that wasn't reliable, and he couldn't learn, and Rabbi Kiva said, you must have eaten something that wasn't kosher. And we want our lives, we want to be bali nefesh. We want to be bali nefesh. What's important to us is our neshama. Of course, we want to have a good vacation because we want to learn better. Or we want to daven better. So you're going to go and then put something that's going to be destructive to your neshama into your body. We wouldn't want to do that. So we want to do the highest level of kashrus. We want to try to be as careful as we could possibly be under the right circumstances. And if there's something on the wall that someone says it's okay, that's not enough for me. If someone says, look, I don't really care, okay, I'm not going to say it's treif. I won't say that. It's very rare that you could say about anything that has the 2 as we mentioned. As Rabbi Krakowski mentioned. Anyway, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Rabbi Krakowski for the schus. Rabbi Krakowski is going to say closing remarks, for the schus to be able to stand here next to him, a person who is, Baruch Hashem, giving over himself to Klal Yisrael. And thank you all. And I want to wish everyone, Be'ez Hashem, they should have a ben hazmanim, kosher, v'sameach.
Just close also. I'm just going to close by thanking the Ma'arganim, Rabbi Carlebach, who asked me to come. It was a tremendous, tremendous chus. And to be able to, b'makom del talmud, but from Gedolei, HaMitzuyonei, HaMechanchem of the Dar, it was a tremendous chus for me to be able to do this evening together with Rabbi Center, such a chashuv Beis Medrash, with such a chashuv Eilam. And Be'ez Hashem, it should be a chus, I hope for me and whatever I'm doing, but that it should be a schos for each and every person here that came. It was matriach to such a late hour, as we keep on being reminded. Thank you.